Good morning all, it's Archivist here and welcome to No Man's Sky. Before I get into the meat of this video, I would just like to point out that I'm not recording this in the traditional way. I am using Nvidia Shadowplay, but because the game doesn't traditionally support it, I'm having to run it in windowed mode, which will cause some frame rate issues and make it quite blurry. So what I mean by this is what you're seeing is not necessarily representative of what the game is like to play. So that in mind, please go by what I'm saying rather than what you see. Okay, so in this video I'd like to answer 3 questions. What's the PC port like? What's the gameplay like? And is it worth the money? So the PC port, what's that like? At the moment this is very much a hot topic, and I'll just start by saying this: the recommended specs on Steam are total rubbish. You need to have a pretty beefy machine to run this game at a decent frame rate. I mean like an i7 quad core, a GTX 900 series, something up to date. You don't want something minimal, certainly not integrated. If you try and run it with an old graphics card, it's either going to run terribly or it's just going to crash on you. A lot of people are reporting this game crashing. Luckily I've managed to avoid this myself, but it's clearly a prominent issue. But I think in this video I would just like to go through my experience and how I've made it a little bit better for myself actually. So when I first played the game, I was, I have to say, horrified, because I started playing it and the first thing you see in this intro sequence is you doing this slow pan around the planet to basically take in what is meant to be the beauty around you. However, this is significantly taken away from, because the slow pan is the most stuttery thing I've ever seen. And I noticed that when I finally got control of the game and I was able to modify the settings, that for some inexplicable reason it was capped to 30 frames per second, and naturally I changed this very quickly and jumped up the graphics settings and made it 1080p, and also made it borderless windowed because I'd actually heard ahead of time that this might be able to help things. And after having to restart the game and having to see the intro again, and weirdly starting on a totally different planet, the frame rate was okay, it was fine. And I continued to walk around the planet, mine for some resources, just generally explore, and you know what? It was totally fine. It was actually a pretty consistent 60 FPS, totally playable, nothing to really complain about. So past that initial bizarreness of them deciding to set it to 30 FPS, the game is alright once you've modified the settings a bit. I really think they should have given you the opportunity before even starting the game to modify them, because most people would look at that 30 FPS and change it immediately. A little tip though, if you haven't done it already, when it says 30 FPS, I initially changed it to 60 FPS as being the limit. What you actually want to do is set that to max, because for some unknown reason, setting it to 60, yes, you'll get more than 30 frames per second, but it will begin to stutter quite badly. So make sure that's set to max, or some people have said 90. Basically, chop and change a bit until you have the ideal frame rate. So, not as bad as some people are saying. However, there is something that I would like to point out as being, in my view, unacceptable at the moment. When you transition from being in outer space to going down to the planet's atmosphere, the frame rate is not good. It starts to stutter quite a lot as it renders the planet below, and this really takes away from that seamless experience that was promised to us from Hello Games. I really loved the idea of 1 minute flying around in outer space and then just diving down to a planet and going into its atmosphere. And yes, you can do that, but the stutter really breaks the seamless immersion that I wanted from this game, and that's something that I really hope they address. The fact that you see the planet rendering in front of you as you zoom down, I can get over, but stuttering, I cannot get over that. So please, Hello Games, look at that. So I guess a summary of the PC ports: not quite up to scratch, but not even close to being as bad as, say, Arkham Knight. So moving on to the game itself, it's very difficult to objectively judge this game, because it's so polarizing. I mean, I've heard wildly different impressions. Some people love it, some people hate it. I find myself enjoying aspects of it and then just pretty much ignoring others. So What I do like about this game, and I find myself coming back to quite a lot, is the exploring. I do like the fact that every time you go to a new galaxy, you can find a planet, go down, and not know quite what you're going to see there. There'll be different plants, different trees perhaps, maybe there'll be no plants or trees, it'll be barren, you might see some really strange animals. It's going to be something new, and it's something you can catalogue, name if you want, and then upload to the greater database, and I do really enjoy that. In fact, that's something I really want to do, is just go around making this massive codex of animals I find and give them really weird, interesting names. So that's something I do like. The resource gathering I see as a necessary element to make this a game, because without it, it would just be exploring pretty much. The combat is, okay, it's terrible, it's just absolute rubbish. I can't stand the combat in this game. I feel it lacks all impact. I think it's pointless, and I feel it was just thrown in there because they needed to have some kind of FPS element, but I don't let that drag down my enjoyment of the game because I could just do without it. The sentinels that come at you if you do enough damage or change the planet enough, I think they should just do away with them. I just find them pointless, annoying, and having to fight them, it's usually just a case of standing there, getting shot at, and then shooting them. There's no kind of real dynamic to it. You can change from your laser to some projectile rapid fire, but it just feels like it makes very little difference. I just do not enjoy the combat, but I do enjoy the exploration, and I'm glad the resource gathering is there. I think it's also quite cool that you've got these other intelligent races throughout the galaxy, and that you have to go to these idols and learn their language over time, and as you gradually learn their language you can interact with them in more sophisticated ways. I think that was a really clever thing to do, and I really like that. Plus there's this very mystical element behind the game where you're finding these strange artifacts that look so otherworldly and kind of transcend it from just any old sci-fi game to something a little bit special. So I do like that. But it really comes down primarily to that exploration and having fun going around looking at these different planets. Although something I will say is that while each planet is technically unique, you can't help but feel that some planets are awfully familiar. And as you fly over the planet's surface in your ship, you think, okay, yes, I can see that the terrain is changing, but, you know, do I really care if I land on this mountain, or that mountain, or that valley, or this valley? It's pretty much all the same. There isn't much variation on a planet itself. I do like the fact though that as well as these really dense planets, you've also got some barren planets. I find myself not spending a lot of time on those barren planets because they're not especially interesting, but it makes the universe seem a little bit more real. And then finally there's the matter of, is it worth the money? And quite simply, no, it's not. It's not worth the money based on how much there is to offer, and also, and I think more importantly, how incomplete it feels. If you spend £40 or however much it is in dollars to get this game on Steam, and then you're greeted with a game that just doesn't perform well even on up to spec hardware, you can't help but feel a little bit cheated because you don't feel as if the refinement has gone into this game that warrants that kind of price tag. And also, as much as there is in the game, I don't think there's enough dynamism within the planets themselves, enough interesting aspects to warrant such a high price tag, a full AAA price tag. So I would strongly recommend waiting for a price drop. But if you're someone who's been really waiting for this game, who's been really excited by those core concepts, and has been holding off because you've been hearing really bad things, I'd actually recommend giving it a go, especially on Steam, because you can play it for, you know, less than 2 hours and then get a refund if you don't like it. But this isn't a broken game. I've played games that are in a far worse state than this. I don't think you'll think you've been absolutely ripped off, especially if you're a big fan of sci-fi. I can imagine Star Trek fans will really like this because that whole concept is pretty much in full force here. So these are my impressions of the game. Apologies for the subpar footage, I really can't do much about that. As always people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.